we'll get started. All right. All right. And let me get us over here. Okay, everybody. We'll have people starting a little early, so we'll have folks come through. So even though you're here, you can go ahead and pick up a couple of minutes or so that we're on the front end of this. Now, the main thing I wanted to do today was to kind of get us take a look. First of all, take a look at the Hewlett that solution, and then take just a kind of a preview of at least one of those, Relax, maybe Welty. And we've got three different cases that we'll be dealing with. So I want to start first of all with the Hewlett key, and it's over there now. Like I've said before, I want you to try these, okay? And then I'll share the key with you, and we'll go from there. Now, so what you'll want to do is you'll want to go over there into the see the B module 3, and you'll see the Hewlett key, and it's published now, so you can take a look at it, and then we'll go from there. Now, I'm going to increase that up just a little bit. It's a little bit more obvious. And find the Hewlett case. And I think I had identified it. Back up here in 3. And okay, I think it's Appendix 3.1. We'll take a look at it here. I'll go back in the index and find it. It's either going to be in the table of contents or the index. And some of these I thought, as I've transferred all this stuff from Moodle over here. Hewlett's going to be over on. I've got it written down here. The Hewlett case is going to be over on pages 210 to 213, but there's some background on the case from pages 165 to 168 that we'll take a look at real quickly. So you ought to have your book open, have it with you, and so we can go through it. Now, they start with using this tool to build a financial portfolio using a financial application. What we're going to see this week is several different applications of optimization in the different business functions. This one in Hewlett happens to deal with building a portfolio, and it starts over there. The background for this case really starts at 164 and 165, and really, Hewlett starts on 165. There is a talk about the cash requirements, then there's a timeline, and then some bond prices, and in terms of the years to maturity, they give you some explanation. And then over on page 166, they define the decision variables for you, okay? And the the objective function here is to minimize the cash the funds needed or the cash necessary at any given time. And they show you the funds available, and they show the equation to get that is the funds available less funds invested, and that's the cash obligation for the year. Now, as they walk on down through the rest of page 166, they come to the bottom there where they give you the conditions for year by year by year. Okay, and those are the constraints. Okay, and then at the top of page 165, they give you the bond, the units purchased, the investment amount, and then they give you a solution, and that solution is out of that solution on page 165 is out of it uses that lingo, which is that web-based thing that we're just not going to mess with. So then also on page 210 to 213, okay, you want to take a look over there. Those first pages gave you some background on Hewlett. Pages 210 through 213, Appendix 4.1, that's the solution, okay, and they show you the solution in Excel, okay, and over on page 211, they walk you really through very clearly through the decision variables, the objective function, left-hand side, and the right-hand sides of the equation. And so I'd ask you to use Solver and to manipulate the variables to compute the cash flows of the minimum fund if the price of all three bonds increased 2.5%, and then secondly, if the price of all three bonds decreased 2.5%. So I gave you a couple of scenarios, and that's pretty typical of what I'll have you do is take some of those decision variables or those constraints and change them a little bit. And if we want, now you know, make sure that you've got Solver open, and if you're here in the lab, you may have to log in and all that business, but I'll just show you. We've got the objective function is over there in B20, and then we're going to have the minimum amount of funds that we have to have available, okay? And they walk us through that equation. We looked at that back in those earlier pages. And so we're trying to keep the minimum amount of money on hand so we can meet the obligations, okay, and still go ahead and make some change on top of it, basically, and get it spread. So they show us the changing variable cells are A17. You'll see I've got them highlighted there. I'll go ahead and turn this on. That would help. And you can see here's the amount of money, the minimum funds necessary year by year. Okay, so this is just a timeline, and then you have the bond prices, and you have some returns, and you really have the bond prices, and then an interest rate, then the year to maturity. And like bond one, you've got its price, okay, and it's got an interest rate of 8.9. Let's call it that among friends, in 5 years to maturity. Then you got the second bond, okay. The first bond trades at a premium, the second bond trades at a discount, and the third trades at a premium. Primarily because those two bonds traded at a premium for a very simple reason. If you look at the interest rate, it's higher than the market rate, so they can get more for the bond. Now, then you can see the years to maturity, 5, 6, and 7. And again, the whole idea here is we're going to see this notion of optimization applied to we're going to see it applied to 2 or 3 different business problems. In this case, we're trying to minimize the amount of money that we've got to have on hand. And it's pretty straightforward there. They even on page 211, they walk us through what's in each cell, and it uses the sum product functions, okay? And then the right-hand side of the equation, same story. You can see the left-hand side, okay? And that equals A17, and you can come up over to we'll find A17, and there it is, okay? That's the cash flow in, that's the cash flow out, and the net cash flow. And so what we want to have in each of these is that the net cash flow equals our cash requirement. That's the constraint. And what they're assuming here is that the variables are on a linear axis. In other words, y and a y and x axis. That's simplex LP. That's what that's all about, linear programming. And the authors there in 210 and 211 give us give us the step. 212 gives you the steps, and then and I added some parameters in there, and then the key thing is over on page 213, and that's the sensitivity report. Okay, and that's one of the things that we want to do. And click on the sensitivity report 1. Okay, and this is where you start to get a sense of how much you can change a particular variable, or how much, if you have any slack resources in there. Now you're going to notice there in the constraints a shadow price, okay? And this is also known as the dual price, and that's the change in the value that you get with one additional increment. So it's a lot. It's like an elasticity. Or it shows you, or marginal utility. It just shows you how much of a change you're going to get, and it shows you also the ranges in terms of an allowable increase and an allowable decrease. Okay, so it lets you see what your parameters or your limits are, and that's pretty much what that sensitivity report is all about. That's all it's intended to do. Then I showed you if the bond prices were increased, okay, and then I just generated a higher prices report. Okay. And then I did the bond prices decrease, and I did a lower prices report. So that was what I did, and I just simply went in and changed those variables. And again, the whole thing was to use Solver and play around with those variables. Now, again, this is intuitively, to a certain extent. It takes you a while to get used to looking at this, whether it's in lingo or it's in Excel. The key thing you always want to be concerned about is the shadow price. That's the same. That term is also the same term as the dual value. What it's really saying is, okay, how much do I gain, okay, if I have an increment of one more thing, or I decrease it? And I'll show you there a range there, the allowable increase and the allowable decrease. I'm a great believer that some of that's good stuff. It's helpful. I think what's more helpful for you is just simply to say, okay, what do I have to have if the bond prices go up, okay? And what do I have to have if the bond prices go down? Okay, and you can see I've got some differences there. And this is typically for a decision maker, this is what's going to make the most sense, is what do I have to pay. Now, that being said, you're going to have some expertise, or you're going to have some way or that you input the data to utilize this model. And that means you got to understand what your cash requirements are. You got to know what the bond prices are. You got to know what the rate, the years of maturity, and all that business. And then that annual savings multiple, okay? And this is bond prices decrease. Same thing if they increase, and you have that multiple there. But the bottom line is this is just, it's a timeline like you would find with any capital project. In this case, the capital project just happens to be an investment fund. Okay, and so you're wanting to, and so the data that are here, the hard part is getting the data assembled and to put into the model. That's the hard part of all of this. And then the next hardest part is, okay, making some kind of decision. And remember that over in chapter 1 in the textbook, and I always refer to it, so might as well just, it's over there talking about model development and that business of problem solving versus decision making. It's over on page 5, okay? And what you'll see is that the steps, as figure 1.1, I can't emphasize that, because what it does is it shows you that practical issue in terms of generating the data. That's part of the problem. That's the problem solving, and choosing an alternative. And the key word there is alternative. Okay, and you might say, okay, bond prices increase. You might have several of these tabs. Okay, you might have, bond prices increase, I've got 2.5% each way. Whatever scenario you think would work out, and that's what you're going to be plugging into. But again, when you see this, okay, while you're seeing an optimization schedule, you're seeing we're minimizing and all that business. What you're really looking at, in all intents and purposes, and those of your finance students ought to understand this, is you're really looking at a pro forma, okay? And you're looking at what are the and you want to use it like that to say, what alternative outcomes do I get if I have certain scenarios occur given my constraints, my conditions. And in this case, it's the bond prices, okay? Now, it might be different if you could say, well, what if I had a different savings multiple? That might be another thing. What if my cash requirements change? That would be another. But again, this model, if it's got good data put into it, it'll give you good output. If it doesn't, it won't. But it's very useful in getting you to focus on those steps. And I'll take you back over to page 210, really to 211, where they walk you through, and this is the solution of Hewlett, and they show it to you in Excel, okay? And they walk you through the decision variables, the objective function, the left-hand sides of the equation, the right-hand side, okay? Those are all, they have got to come from somewhere, and and that's where that's the harder part of gathering that data and getting it pulled together. So I wouldn't tell you that just because you see this or you understand you can run it means that you're going to get, the optimal solution every time. This is something that's on paper, okay? And that's really all it is. You can see right here, okay, where I did that 2.5, and then we'll come back over here, and there we are again. So that's what I can't emphasize to you enough. Now, reading these reports, and I'll go back to it for just a second when this thing starts getting crazy with me. The sensitivity report, okay, whatever, okay. The sensitivity report is the key piece of it. Variable cells are important, okay, those are helpful. What's really important there, in my estimation, are the constraints. And what you want to always look at is, okay, how much variance do I have, or how much give do I have here? And you can see, okay, where I've got at the first, if you look for the pattern there, in the first 4 years, where this comes down to period 5, period 5, I have little, if any, ability to increase this, but it will take lots of decreases, okay? Then as I get into period 6, 7, and 8, you see how that starts to change. So you want to look at that and ask yourself, okay, why would I be seeing this given the context? All right, why would it be giving me this type of a pattern in terms of allowable increase and decreases? And if you look up top in the variable cells, they're almost a mirror image of the other, right? And so what they're telling you there is there's very, very small increases that you can absorb anywhere if you want to stay within the model. Now that makes sense, okay? But again, this is a whole point of getting you to walk through this process and think through it. And again, getting the data to input is the easy part. That's the easiest part. Now, what we have going on today, and again, like I've told you over and over and over, try it, upload your work, then the key, and once I publish that key, you're free to download it, keep it, use it, whatever you want to. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea. It might come in handy sometime if you're wanting to do a capital budget, or buy something, whatever. It's built around a financial model. Okay, and again, that's all there is to it. And let's see, we'll close that down. That's giving me some kind of craziness here. It won't let me stop and get out of it. Oh, okay. Okay, the objective cell must be a single on the single sheet. All right. Let's see if that'll tell me what they want me to do with this jewel. And there it is. Maybe now we're good to go. Yeah. Hang on. I'm going to do a control alternate, delete, and get out of this. Always something. Control alternate, where is delete? Yeah, back to the task manager for a minute. Yeah, look at helix key. Kill that off in that task. Ended. All right. Okay. Now, I have provided you guys some resources on sensitivity analysis from the Easy Excel site. They've got some great stuff to use. I really recommend you go there and take a look at it. Then shadow pricing and linear programming. That's a little bit more ethereal, but you want to take a look at it. And then here are some applications of this concept. Now, this, I think, these two links, if you're a finance major, you ought to really go over and take a look at these resources, because what they're telling us is that the whole idea of the efficient frontier, okay, and that is the portfolio, and I have certain points where I can maximize the outcome of that portfolio. What you're really talking about is the feasible region, and that's what's important to see. Now, as we come down here to this week in Module 4, you're going to see we've got 3 uploads that are due on Friday, and that's Relax, Welty, and Janders. And I want to take a look at them, and before we do that, I want to make sure you know where to go get them, because I know I'll get someone who'll panic and go, "Oh, where's all that?" So let's go over there. All right, we're going to go down here, and we're going to find the files for the course, okay? Yeah. And here they are, the the MS-13 web files. Now let's download them. Exactly. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at those chapters each week, and I think we're going to be looking at chapter 5. You want to go into the Excel files, okay? Let me go back to that because I'm just going to download the thing and go hunting for them. But you'll find those files in the web files, and I'm not asking you to do anything in terms of, and I think it's going to be in chapter 2. Open it up. We'll start with that first one, and yeah, well, that's Paring. Okay, so I'm going to do Hewlett key. Yeah, okay, Hewlett's in chapter 4. So let's go back up to the top. And we'll open up chapter 4. Now, yeah, Hewlett, we've done. Relax. 155 to 157. What we're going to do is, and what I want you to do is to upload those files. Now, I'm not going to ask you, okay, to do any manipulation of the variables, because I want you to see how we apply it. Now, it's over on page 155 through 157, so it's going to be in chapter 4. Well, and let's just pop over to 4. Obviously, I'll open that up, and then we'll open up the Excel files. Okay? Yeah. And there we're going to find it. This is for the Relax. It works. Okay. I mean, it works. And the whole point of this is that the authors want to show you, okay? Let me do something here for just a minute.
hogs with great heads. And we had Pumbaa on our back.
I'm gonna mute everybody.
Get it? Pumbaa?
Because I'm getting some feedback. Okay, now what the authors are going to do is take us through each of these chapters, these three cases, applications in some different functional areas. Okay, and this first one, this is the Relax and Enjoy Development Corporation, and again, it's over on pages 155 through 157, and this involves a media buy. Okay. What type of media do we buy? How much do we spend? Based upon an objective function, which this is right here, the maximum exposure for my money. So if you're a marketing student, this ought to be something that you take a look at, because you're going to be dealing with a real world problem. Just like we were looking at Hewlett, which is a real world problem. Insurers have to work that type of problem through. Investment companies have to work that type of problem through. You got to have the cash on hand, etc. Well, if you're an advertising agency or a marketing firm or boutique type of operation, you've got to have a handle on what your media buys cost you, and if you have a client, they're going to want to have some sense that you know what you're doing. So this is a case about a marketing company and utilizes marketing, and you'll see starts at 155, and the authors are going to march you through three of these. That's why I have these three, and you'll find these files. So all you have to do is upload these files. Okay, but what I do want you to do is take a look, open the file, upload the file so you get the credit for the workshop. Okay, there's three of them. But what I think is more important is that you take a look at them, okay, and you look at the file, and you look and you have your text, and you follow along with it closely. And I'm not going to parrot all that, because you're big people and you need to know how to do this, or you need to do this. If you're a marketing major, you really want to be focused on this, because this is your alley. This deals with these ads placed. You can see them. It's a media buy problem, okay? And if you're not a marketing major, you might want to ask yourself, okay, if I'm ever in a situation where I'm running a company and I have somebody who is a vendor for me, who provides me that service, or if I'm, if I'm in a larger firm and I'm dealing with the VP of marketing and I'm the VP of whatever, you'll want to have a sense of how that marketing budget was put together. And, it's not a bad idea to say, okay, how did you come up with this? Now, what you'll find, what you'll find is particularly something like this, is there'll be some historic issues that will come up. That is, well, that's who we've always bought it from. That's how much we've always paid. This is what's worked in the past, etc. And this case is just really a summary, and doesn't address all the organizational issues that get involved with this kind of thing, but it gives you a working model. Okay, and if you were a marketing manager and you're smart, you might come in and say, look, here's a tool to let us do some planning, and what media do we have not listed here? Okay, and there are some. Okay, and this is really relying on television. Okay, so you might need to put two or three of these together. Maybe you want integrated marketing, maybe you want just TV, maybe you want something for the internet. I don't know, but the model is what's important. Okay, that's what's important, and the thought process, and they'll walk you through there. They start really there at the top at the bottom of 156 and 55, excuse me, and they walk you through the advertising alternatives. Okay, now these are old media kinds of things that they've got here. All right, so don't let that throw you. I recognize the fact that they're not talking about AdSense or anything of that sort. Okay, certainly if you were going to use this, you would have to put that in. But again, those data get sketchy, etc. But where they're just dealing with their television budget. Okay, and that might be what they're on cable, I would assume it's probably TV ads you're going to put on cable, for example. And you can see the number of potential customers reached, the cost per advertisement, the maximum times per month, and then they have an exposure quality units. So you're already starting to see some decision variables, some constraints, and you're already starting to kind of see an objective function emerge in terms of the maximum exposure, because you want to have the maximum number of people see your ads the maximum number of times. And you want to make sure that when you do that, you have the placement. Now, if you were just taking and you just say, okay, this is just the TV, yeah, it's going to depend upon the expertise of the person. Again, these cases are these cases are, they're what they are. They're cases, but underneath them is a template, okay? If I went to Walmart and I bought a paper plate, and then I went to the finest department store in New York City, and I bought a set of china, what do I have? On one hand, I have a piece of material that's very expensive and has been beautifully produced, etc. On the other hand, I have a paper plate. But what do I do with them? I eat off of them, right? So I have a template. They perform the same function. It's the same story, and that's why I'm trying to impress on you is this approach in management science that helps us understand what you actually do. I've had people ask me what really goes on in the decision-making process, and I say there's one or two ways decisions get made. Somebody shoots off their hip relying on past history, which may or may not be applicable, or based on their ego, or somebody sits down and does some hard work of getting some data put together and looking at the constraints and trying to ask, okay, what are our decision variables? What's driving our decision? And what do we want to achieve? Are we trying to minimize, maximize, or hit a target? And that's everything. You said, you sound like a broken record. I'm going to. You said, why don't more people do this? Well, in some companies, people are forced to do it. If I am the local, if I run a large franchise and a food franchise, I'm doing this. I have a whole department of people that do nothing but schedule, logistics, and inventory because I got to have stuff out in my stores. You can't go to Jack in the Box, okay, and order, whatever is whatever they're advertising on TV, and it not be there. It's got to be there. So you got to use these techniques. Some companies are not forced to do that. Now, some of them, and what's been interesting to me is, and I encounter this with people who start lawn mowing services or gardening services, and what they eventually do is they overbook and overschedule, and then they make everybody mad at them, and people quit using them, and then they just kind of slowly, go out of business. Whereas instead, if they built routes and zones and optimized where they were going and what they were doing, be a whole different story. Be a whole different story. So, this is an attempt to try to rationalize a lot of the muck that we have to work our way through when we're out there in business. Okay, so I'm not going to sugarcoat this and tell you that this is the answer to all your problems. But I will tell you that if you're going to try to problem solve, it's rare that you're going to have, you or anyone else, the insight to just see the solution and fix it, okay? And one of the worst things you can do is rely on what I call superstitious behavior, and that is do the same thing you've done over and over because it proved effective. Doesn't work like that. It can't work like that, okay? It just won't. Now, if you take a look here at this Relax and Enjoy Development Corp, they are trying to get maximum exposure, okay? And let's take a look and click on we'll click on data, okay? And we'll look at the solver, and we'll see what we're doing, and we're trying to maximize our exposure, so this is a maximization problem. Now, if we were talking about the marketing budget, we'd be talking about one of two things: a value, a target, or minimizing. But here we're talking about exposure. And that's one of the beautiful things about this is I can take some of this and mix and match it and play with it and change this tempo a little bit and achieve 2 or 3 different things with it, not just one. But here we're all about how much exposure we get. So I've got the maximum exposure, I've got that chosen, okay? And then I've got the changing cells. Those are the variables I'm dealing with, okay? And that's B13 through F13. And there they are, the ads placed. And each of those acronyms are explained over at the top of page 156. Okay? And you can see what they are. Okay? And then we've got the constraints. Okay? And we run the solution, and then we get a sensitivity report. Now I'm just going to click solve on it. Not going to break it. And it says, yeah, we've got to solve. And let's look at this for a moment. Once I've run it, I've got 3 kinds of reports I can run: the answer, sensitivity, and the limits. Now we did a sensitivity report, okay? And on this, I might want to try the limits report just to see what I get. And I get limits report number 1. And it tells me my upper and lower limits. Think of this like a z-score. If you remember back to statistics, or think of this about how much variance do I have around the mean. Or if you want to be more pure in the outlook of this, you could say, okay, I'm dealing with this. I'm assuming this is a linear problem. So how much variation can I have in terms of cluster to that line of best fit or away from it? Okay, and that's just something that's going to be up to you to do. But this is a way of thinking. It's not just using a piece of software. It's not just it's just not something geeky. It's a way of thinking. Okay. I remember that my dad, I asked him about his experiences during the Second World War. He came into Europe about 4 months after D-Day, and I said, "How did you know that the Germans were losing? How did you know?" And he says, "Very simple." He said, "I saw that they were using horses and mules and carts to haul ammunition, because when they would overrun a position, they'd find all these animals." At first, everybody was baffled. They said, "Germans have a deep love for these horses, or a deep love for mules." And then they started saying, "No, they use them because they don't have gas for their vehicles, and they don't have maintenance parts for their vehicles." Okay, and then he said, "How I really knew they were losing is when we crossed into Germany, we were fighting, and when after a fight was over, we'd go up and we'd see kids 10, 11, and 12 years old." He said, "That's when we knew the end was near." So there are those kinds of things that experience will teach you and will help you understand. So again, this is a good model. It's a good starting place. It's a way to have a discussion. And the relax and enjoy does it. And so they walk you there through the variables, and then the constraints, and those are all laid out there. And they show us the objective function on how we calculate the exposure quality. And we want different levels of exposure for different types of media. And then we have the budget as a constraint, and then we have television restrictions, because the TV people, or the media buy problem is you've got people who say, "I will sell you only so many ads." Why? Because if people see a certain number of ads at certain number of times in a day, they're going to quit watching my channel because they're just tired of the ads. Okay? or they'll get offended or whatever. So there's that issue of, the TV restrictions, plus they themselves operate under a budget, so they've got to make sure that when they do a buy, they don't miss an opportunity. Okay, that's why if you tune into certain programs, I can tell you, right, if you watch college football Saturday night, I can tell you you're looking at beer commercials, probably cars, insurance. Oh, I know for sure you'll see those three. And then you'll see some local advertising, but the national advertising will just be, that's because people watch that versus watching something else, are that time of day are going to be attracted to something different. So that's that piece where the experience part comes through. But again, this is a way to do this, and it works. These approaches work because they help us rationalize the process a little bit. So the Relax and Enjoy Development Corporation is a marketing problem. We looked at that. We'd taken a look then at the financial application, and they walk us through the solutions, and then show that in the lingo, and then the budget for the company in terms of what they're going to spend. And then they go ahead and give you some more notes about that. And they take, then over on page 158, and we didn't mess with it at all, but they walk you through doing some marketing research and a market survey, and they show you how you could use it in a marketing research problem. How much am I going to spend? Okay. In decision science, there's a thing called the value of perfect information. And the VPI is how much would I spend, the amount of money I would spend for a market survey or market study, okay, should be equal to at least some marginal or incremental amount that I get. And that's really all there is to this, okay? So they've shown us that application there for the marketing. And then they get over to page 161, and that's Welty, that deals with the portfolio problem, okay? And that's another one that you'd want to upload. And so I'm going to close this one off. Again, you don't have to do anything with the variables. I just want you to see them and to upload them. But more importantly, to say, okay, if I'm a marketing major or I'm a finance major, how does this fit? And this is what you take all that other knowledge and you apply it into this template. And we're going to look at Welty. We'll open it for just a minute. Okay. And Welty starts over on page 161. This is a mutual fund company. And again, they're trying to build a portfolio, rates of return, and the optimal selection of the items for that portfolio. And what you'll see is a projected rate of returns for a set of investments. Okay. And now this could also be a model where you're not looking at stuff you're going to buy, but let's say that you treat a company as a portfolio. Let's say you have a conglomerate or you have several companies merged into one. You could use this tool to say, okay, what's the rate of return on that firm? Treating that firm as an asset. Okay, what do we do with it? And apply this model. I could look at product lines. Okay, and that's essentially, if you're an investment company, that's really what these two oil companies and the steel and the government bonds, those are product lines, types of products, types of investments. But you might use this to balance out investment in certain products that you carry. It's a versatile tool, and that's what I think is so incredible about it, is it's so versatile and you can use it in so many different situations. And it's helpful because it helps you move the conversation out of, well, that's how we did it for the past 150 years, or the organizational politics that get mixed up in things, and moves you to a point where you can have a conversation and you can get some realistic data and start to talk about what is it that we need to do, what's our objective, what are our decision variables, what are we trying to achieve, okay? And it helps deflect some of the especially in larger companies, really big companies, when they do their capital budgeting, will have, or they'll do their media buy, they'll have committees of people that put this stuff together and then take it upstairs to the top, to the executive level, and I'll say, okay, here's, here, this is our plan for media buy, here's our capital budgeting plan, and they'll use these tools. One way or the other, they will. Now, there's some people out there in the world for whom this just happens now. They just have the gift. They see this, okay? The rest of us, go to business school to figure this stuff out, okay? And there are just some people who just see all of this. And I think I've spoken before, probably the best example of what I'm talking about is Steve Jobs, who, when he was run out of Apple, was a design guy. He was all about designing the product. And when he came back to Apple and they were going under and they begged him, would you please come back and save us after we kicked you out? He came back and he was all about supply chain, logistics, manufacturing. And he really became one of the world's experts in those processes of what we would call production and operations. What happened with him? He clearly recognized, okay, that what had happened is he was designing great products and everybody loved them until they had some faltering steps. But what he wasn't doing was optimizing within his company. And so he began that process. One of the reasons that Google buys up companies and they have this crazy R&D thing and all this is because they're always out there looking for something. They've got the cash to burn to look for opportunities and to identify problems. So there are people like Jobs who could just see this and understand it because he was a genius. And there's the rest of us, okay? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't use these tools. So here's another application for this. When I'm looking at a projected rate of return, okay? Now that projected rate of return, I should assume, is based upon some type of probabilistic estimate, okay, that I've come up with, or someone has sent to me, or someone has given to me, okay? And when people talk about rate of return on assets, they're really talking about two things: the rate of return and a probability of that rate of return, okay? And if it's pieces of a portfolio and you're saying, okay, what are the probabilities that Atlantic Oil will actually give me a 7.3% return? 80%, 9%, 100%? The probabilities for all of those have got to add up to 1. So right now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm assigning about a 0.2 to each of them. I stop and look at that as a weighted. If it's a weighted portfolio, that's what I've just done. And so if I put weights to it, it would look very different. So that, again, you say, well, this just sounds like a broker record. Yes, it does, because it's a template, but I can use it in so many different ways and in so many different situations. So this is a mutual fund issue, okay? And they ask us to run the report. And you'll see there at the shadow price, if you look there in the constraints area and the shadow price, and what they're telling us is, if we can increase it 6.9% by an additional unit investment. So we're looking at marginality there. That's what we're always looking at. That's what we're thinking about. Well, folks, let me close this off, and you're going to find these in, I think, chapters 4, 5, and 6. And I'll go back over here, and I'll close this off. And here's the deal for this week. We'll go back up here to the module. Well, it'll be simpler to go to the syllabus. What's due on the 22nd is, of course, the exam, and then Jander's leisure, relaxed, and wealthy. You don't have to do anything with them, just upload them. But what I do encourage you is, depending upon your major, or if you say, well, I'm a management major, if you're a management major, in my opinion, you really ought to dig into all of them, but certainly dig into the ones that fit, like wealthy. If you're a marketing major, you ought to be taking a look at that fit within your particular discipline. But the whole point of this is that you could see this is a remarkably versatile tool. It's an incredible tool that's so useful, and because you live in a time of such intense competition, if you don't do this kind of work, you're going to get slaughtered. You won't last. Okay, whether you might be so small and dinky you're under the radar. Okay, I'm Larry's Donuts over here. Okay, who cares? But at some point, if you have a nice piece of real estate there and you've survived, not because you have the best donuts in town, but or a great atmosphere, but because you're in a location, someone will come looking for you. They will find you sooner or later. So you'll want to utilize these tools, okay? And we're going to see some later examples of them and what we can get done with them. And again, you've got those cases, upload them by the 22nd, and then we'll move on to next week. So I'm going to stop here for just a minute. I'm going to see how many folks we've got. We've got 7 of us or so. Thank you for you guys who are here today in class. And I'm going to unmute all. Anybody have any questions? I see Suzanne, Allison, Sam, Tyler. Any of you have a question? May not. Do you have a mic? Okay. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to end this thing, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And I will see all of you next week. I'll be looking for I'm going to pre-record a broadcast for Wednesday.
There's no way I'm going to go after the class.
Stop that.